Tonight on LTC News, new election districts drawn for Lowell.
Through that process and also a survey in which I believe we got a little over 100 people, created a draft map that was presented to the city's mapping expert, and the result is fairly close. What the city's expert came up with is fairly close to the map that was presented by the Lowell Lions Coalition.
Addressing racism in the public schools.
One of the most overwhelming concerns that students expressed was, they felt as though staff and administrators were not handling their grievances and, concerns with earnest.
In feeding the hungry.
Just in September, our member agencies reported serving 60,000 people, and that's up from 45,000 in August, and it's up 28% from September of 2019.
All this and much more on this edition of LTC News. Welcome to LTC News. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. November 17th marked the 40th anniversary of the Officer Rouses Memorial at JFK Plaza. The statue was erected to honor Officer Rouses, who on that day was shot chasing a robbery suspect, as well as all the other officers lost in the line of duty. Last year, the statue was memorialized with a large public ceremony, but this year, that had to be curtailed due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Police Superintendent Raymond Richardson marked the memorial with some words of remembrance.
It's a solemn day here at Lowell Police Department. We're here to honor the memory of Officer Rouses, who was killed in the line of duty 42 years ago today. We're also here to honor the other three officers that we lost in the line of duty, Officer Pearsall, Officer Wynn, and Officer Levitt. But because of the COVID-19 restrictions that we're all trying to abide by, we had to cut this event down to a much smaller event with just myself, the two deputies, Officer Jose Lorenzi and Officer Ray Royal. I hope people out there are taking this pandemic seriously. It seems to be coming back a lot stronger. You can see the effect it had. Usually last year we had this event, we had over probably 70 people here. But Officer Rouses was a respected member of this police department, went to work like every police officer does every day, and expected to go home that day. And he did not. He responded to an alarm call on Branch Street at Libby's Drug and was shot and killed at that robbery. But we did not forget Officer Rouses, and we will never forget Officer Rouses, Officer Pearsall, Officer Levitt, or Officer Wynn. Thank you.
The City of Lowell released a map of the proposed election district lines that would go into effect for the next municipal election in 2021. To learn more, we spoke with Nancy Cohn of the Lowell Alliance and OREN SELLSTROM, who represented the plaintiffs in the Hewitt et al. Case that brought about the changes to Lowell's election system.
My name is OREN SELLSTROM. I'm the litigation director of Lawyers Civil Rights. We're a nonprofit civil rights law firm, and we had the honor and privilege of representing the group of Asian and Latino plaintiffs who filed the Voting Rights Act lawsuit that we're going to be discussing today. We filed that suit in 2017 because the all at-large citywide method of electing public officials was diluting the vote of communities of color in a way that was both unfair and made the elected bodies not reflective at all of the rich diversity of Lowell.
The city was one of the few larger municipalities in the Commonwealth that still had at-large voting across the whole city, and there was a thought among the plaintiffs in the lawsuit that this violated the Voting Rights Act because they didn't have an equal opportunity to kind of have their say in city government when they had, when the votes went across the entire city. So there was a lawsuit, and the settlement of that lawsuit was a consent decree in which we all agreed that we would divide the city into 8 districts, which sort of opens up opportunities for people to run for office and to feel more meaningfully connected to their representatives in office, because it's someone in their area of town, not someone in another part of the city that they're not familiar with and have never met. The Voting Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution both say that, we need to create opportunities for people to have a meaningful way to vote, and the current system wasn't doing that. So It's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? You can say these people didn't come out and vote, but if they didn't feel like their voices were heard and the system didn't create opportunities for them to feel connected, then that's why they're not voting. So you create the opportunities and then they do vote, and then that's good for everybody. We want more citizens to be involved and to feel connected to government and to feel like their voices are heard.
I'm Nancy COAN from the Director of Lowell Alliance, and we are one of several local organizations who worked with OREN and Lawyers for Civil Rights to educate or inform the public about the change in the voting system. We actually started working back when the suit, shortly after the suit was filed. We worked with OREN to hold several informational sessions throughout the city and in different languages, so people would know that this was happening and why it was happening. Through that process, and also a survey in which I believe we got a little over 100 people, created a draft map that was presented to the city's mapping expert, and the results is fairly close. What the city's expert came up with is fairly close to the map that was presented by the Lowell Alliance Coalition.
So in addition to working with Lowell Alliance, we were also working very closely with CMAA, the Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association, and the Latinx Community Center for Empowerment, and other community leaders to get input from Lowell residents about exactly where the district line should be drawn. If you're starting with a blank slate of a map of the city of Lowell, there are a lot of different ways that the district map could be drawn. But we wanted to make sure that it was a way that made sense for Lowell's residents, that kept neighborhoods together where it made sense to do that. If there were different communities that had similar interests, similar issues that they might want to bring to their city councilor in the future, a school committee member, that those communities stayed together and that where those lines were drawn made sense in a way for all of Lowell's residents. This is still a preliminary step. There will be other steps along the way, but certainly this first step, we have been quite pleased to see that it really reflects the hard work and the community input that we saw this summer.
The initial map that we're working on right now will be finalized by hopefully January, and then it'll be immediately revised once we get the 2020 census data, which is currently scheduled for hopefully March or April of 21. Once we have that data, this map will be fine-tuned to reflect the changes from the 2010 census. And then, as is written in the consent decree, it will be updated every census. So every 10 years, it'll be adjusted not by the city, but by an expert, by a professional who does this for a living.
Following the murder of George Floyd, systemic racism has become a frequent topic of discussion around the country as the public and legislators try to work towards a more just and equitable future. During the city's Lowell Listens session over the summer, several Lowell students spoke about their experiences of discrimination and harassment in the Lowell school system. In response, Lowell Public Schools developed new systems for reporting, investigating, and remediating bias-based incidents.
One of the most overwhelming, concerns that students expressed was, they felt as though staff and administrators were not handling their grievances and, concerns with earnest.
I have seen time and time again students of color getting suspended for doing things that white students get away with, whether it be fighting or loitering in the hallways. These suspensions go on their permanent records, making it harder for them to apply to certain colleges.
And they shared that with us, and they held us accountable for kind of creating some type of, protocol, a tool to make sure that, we rectify that issue and create transparency around that process.
In 2016, I ran for class president at Law High School, and I had racial slurs sent to me towards texts. One of them was, lynching, that I should be lynched and stuff. And it became big because the school didn't do nothing about it and they hid it under the rug.
It's a way for us in a structured manner to allow students, staff, families to report incidents, and now we're able to address it formally. Whereas prior to this process, it was more of, as relates to racism, it was more of, word of mouth. I talk to someone I know, they talk me through it. they resolve it independently, and we never truly understand whether the matter's been resolved.
A couple months before quarantine started, we had a cultural day, and I was told that I was a thug at Low High by a teacher just because I had my white undershirt and I had a gray do-rag on.
One of the beautiful parts of this new protocol is that students have options. They can utilize this user-friendly tool themselves and this reporting form themselves to fill it out. And then, once it's submitted, it notifies, leadership and school-based level staff and leadership. And then we take it from there with the investigation process and we go through that.
Someone is designated within every school to do the follow-up and investigation if necessary, and to have a conclusion to each form that is submitted.
If students don't feel comfortable filling it out themselves or utilizing it themselves, they also have the option of going to a trusted ally and a trusted school staff member at the school and say, hey, this is what took place, kind of delineating what took place. And it is our obligation as, mandated reporters to fill out that report for the students, right? Typically and historically, we've used, when I say we, I mean, in the education realm, punitive methods to discipline when holding students accountable and folks accountable for inaction. And that has not been proven to be effective in terms of change, student behavior and student change. In restorative justice practices, it allows students to reflect on the experience and benefit from the experience, regardless of how severe it was. Good graces, we haven't had to use this protocol much. And I'm hoping that we don't have to. Again, it's just a tool that if we need it. But, if it does come about that we have to use it, we are looking forward to see how effective it is so we can then bring it back and improve it.
The pandemic has disrupted many lives and livelihoods, causing increased demand for food assistance in Lowell. This urgent need for food is being met by many nonprofit community pantries, agencies, and churches, forming a huge service network operated with hundreds of volunteers throughout the city. The Dwelling House of Hope is one of these pantries, collecting food donations from multiple sources, including the Merrimack Valley Food Bank, which in 2019 donated 3.75 million pounds of food.
Just in September, our member agencies reported serving 60,000 people, and that's up from 45,000 in August. And it's up 28% from September of 2019. That's a testament to how the lack of resources or the timing of resources is causing people who have never had to ask for help before to go to a food pantry. And we want people watching to know that there's no shame. There shouldn't be any embarrassment if anybody needs help with food. Thanksgiving is a very special season here at the food bank and for people who celebrate this annual tradition. And we gladly accept donations of frozen turkeys. We have seen an extraordinary amount of generous donations of gift cards for supermarkets and frozen turkeys. And our freezer is full of frozen turkeys as we speak. There is a sufficient level of food to satisfy the needs and health concerns of all of our neighbors. The challenge is access. We, for example, here at the food bank, we operate a mobile pantry. And we've been doing this as part of the food bank for 17 years. And we deliver groceries to people that are homebound. They're too frail or ill, most of them are elderly and disabled, to get to a food pantry. We bring them once a month, through volunteers, 30 days worth of food. That helps them maintain their health and use their resources to pay their financial obligations.
Dwelling House of Hope is a food pantry which is located on 125 Mount Hope Street. We serve families, like last month we served like 700 plus families, which is a total of almost 3,000 people. We get our food from, some of the food we get it from Walmart, Trader Joe's, Stop and Shop, Hannaford's, and we also get from Merrimack Valley Food Bank. We open on Saturday from 10 o'clock. And for people who come to pick food for distributing, like Lowell Community Health Center, Vinfen, Active Day, churches, they come on Thursday and they pick the food in bulk to go deliver to their people. On Thanksgiving, like we already started registering people in advance, which we don't usually do. People, they just walk in. But we have already registered people in advance, and United Ways donated 300 gift certificates for Market Basket. And so what we'll do is when people, they come, they're not going to wait very long like they usually do. We will already pack the boxes and bags of food. So those who have already registered in advance, we just look at their number and we give them their package and they leave.
In this week's edition of Sunspot, Lowell Sun Enterprise editor Chris Scott sits down with city manager Eileen Donoghue.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Scott, the Enterprise Editor at The Sun. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of our Zoom Sunspot, the Sun's weekly or bi-monthly contribution to the LTC news show. With us is Eileen Donoghue, the City Manager of Lowell. She's been a guest several times before. Eileen, thank you for coming on again.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on.
I know there's a lot you'd like to talk about, mainly related to the pandemic, so why don't we just jump right into it. You were gracious enough to give an interview to Alana Melanson earlier this week about your concerns about what's happening in the city and across the Commonwealth. Why don't you just bring us up to date?
Over the past 14 days in the city of Lowell, we've had 1,133 cases, 14 days. That works out to be, the measure to go in to be a red community is 8 cases per 100,000 over a 14-day period. We're at 62 per 100,000. So we not only are in the red zone, we are so far and so solidly in the red zone when we are logging in at 62 cases per 100,000. Let me give you a contrast to that. So we had 1,133 cases in the past 14 days. In the first week of September, we had less than 100 cases over a 14-day period. We were, I think, 4 cases per 100,000 in that period of time. We were a green community. So when you look over a 2-month period, it is startling how drastic the case increase has been.
What type of tracing is the city doing, and what can you attribute that to? Can you, there's been all sorts of attempts to figure out why the surge is happening. Right. People have been pointing at younger people and younger groups. People have mentioned the schools. People have mentioned universities and colleges. And I think it's all kind of pie in the sky attempts. I mean, from what I've read, it just seems too broad to actually, okay, this is why it's happening. But yeah, your point of view, can you take a stab at that anyway?
Let me talk about that. So we are doing contact tracing through our public health department, our public health nurses, and some of our school nurses are also doing contact tracing because we're mostly remote when it comes to school. So the nurses have pivoted and begun contact tracing in many instances. We also have the state helping us do contact tracing because of the numbers. What we know in the city of Lowell over the past month or so, the large amount of cases, about 70% are people 40 years and younger. So it's not the older cohort that it was in the spring. It's 40 years and under for the large lion's share of the cases. I think the other thing, to the point of where are they coming from, it's community spread, but we also have noticed and been able to trace certain gatherings that have resulted in a number of cases. Gatherings where there's been, you could call it a party, a get together. But in one case, and this is just one,
Yeah.
And this shows you the complexity of contact tracing. Joanne Belanger mentioned today on our call,
The public health director,
public
right?
health director, that one of the people who was tested positive in a recent contact tracing had 20 contacts that had to be contacted because they were in touch or in close contact with so many people. So just figure that as a multiplier. If we have, 105 cases on a given day, one case could result in the nurses having to contact 20 people. Multiply that times 100 people.
Will Lowell host a field hospital as it did during the first surge in the earlier part of the year?
There are discussions around that. I think the state is exploring. I know they are exploring that. Finding something that's suitable remains, a work in progress. The last time we did it, I think it worked out very well. As it turned out, we didn't need it, thankfully. But we were fortunate enough to have the access to the University of Mass Lowell Recreation Center because they were shut down. I think their plans are a little bit different right now.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
I think the university is doing the best it can. They've been managing this, having reduced number of people on campus. They've been doing robust testing. People do have the virus, but it hasn't been a complete out of control situation there. I think you have to proceed very cautiously, and I trust that's what they are doing. Look, we're all looking at the data and numbers every single day. Every day you have to take into account what's happening with these numbers and make decisions accordingly. And sometimes you have to change course.
Just in wrapping up, just take a minute or so just to make your plea to the residents of Lowell moving forward through Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's.
I think, we cannot stress enough how important it is to not let our guard down at this point. You have to please observe the advice. And when it comes to Thanksgiving and Christmas, do not have large gatherings as much as you want to. The number is 10 or under is what we've been advised. Try and keep it to your own household or bubble. Wear your mask. Wash your hands, social distance, and then, as I mentioned earlier, don't expose people who are vulnerable, people who are older, people who have some pre-existing medical condition. Use common sense. And if you do that, you'll protect yourself, you'll protect your family, your loved ones, your friends, and just people in the community in general. If we don't do that, this virus will rage out of control, and we will be looking at very, very serious consequences. It is within your power to control and to try and help limit the spread, help stop the spread of the virus. So please adhere to these very, very sage words of advice from not me, but from the medical experts.
Well, I couldn't say it better myself. We'll cut it at that. Eileen Donoghue, City Manager of Lowell, trying to manage through this crisis. Thank you for appearing on another edition of Sunspot. We'll be back in a couple more weeks, I think, after Thanksgiving. Maybe we'll bring it back on to see how things are going then. But thank you for tuning in, everyone, tonight. Have a good Thanksgiving and stay healthy.
And that does it for this edition of LTC News. You can find us on LTC channels 8, 95, and 99, online at ltc.org, on Roku in the LTC News playlist, on Facebook at LTC Lowell, or on our YouTube page. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. Thanks for joining us.